Hello and welcome to more history stuff. So in this video I wish to continue the series on the Lascarid emperors who did so much to restore the Roman Empire or the Byzantine Empire in the 13th century after the fall of Constantinople to the army of the Fourth Crusade in 1204. In my last video I spoke about the first ruler of the Lascarid dynasty, the emperors of Nicaea in western Anatolia, what is now western Turkey. He was Theodore I Lascaris, that died in 1221, and he was succeeded by his son-in-law, a man named John Doukas Vatatzes. And this was because Theodore left no son, and John was considered the most capable of the potential successors. He was the son of a general, military family, the Vatatzes, and Theodore wisely made John his successor. Now John would rule for the next 30 years or so, and he would prove very successful, astonishingly successful in the end. And his great achievement was to extend the territory of the Empire of Nicaea into the Balkans, and basically to surround the city of Constantinople, which had been taken by the Western Crusaders, the Latins, to the point where the city was completely isolated, surrounded on all sides by what was now once again Roman territory. And this created the conditions where it was possible to reconquer the city, the capital of the empire, and basically re-establish the old Roman Empire and reverse what had happened in 1204. And it's the successors of this emperor, John III Doukas Vatatzes, who ruled from 1221 to 1254, I think, that made this possible. Now, John Vatatzes is still regarded as a saint in the Greek Orthodox Church. I think his festival day or saint day is the 4th of November. And within 50 years of his death, tales began to circulate of this saint emperor, that his spirit had been seen on the walls of Constantinople, and that he was capable of healing the sick, a bit of a sort of Christ figure. And he was worshipped in this way for centuries, and as I say, is still regarded as a saint. Which shows just how remarkable he was, that he should be remembered in that way for so long. But there is a distinction to be made, and I don't wish to offend anyone here, offend any people in Greece, but there is a distinction to be made between the political reality of this man's life and his career and what he did, and this sort of image of him as this saintly, stainless figure. And this is generally the case of all medieval figures. When you look closely at them, they all turn out to be quite sort of different to this later sort of romantic image. So, I mean, John Vatatzes' reign is very complicated, full of incident, and I can't go through it all in a short video. But I just want to make a few points. So he began by recovering the western part of the Empire of Nicaea, which his predecessor Theodore had been driven out from by the Latins. John fights this battle against a Latin army in 1224, also against two of his own brothers who had joined the Latins. The history of the Roman Empire, or the Byzantine Empire, is full of these sort of betrayals and cross alliances and backstabbing. And John is forced to fight against a coalition of a Frankish or Latin army in which he's basically been betrayed by two of his brothers. He wins the battle, defeats the Latins, captures his brothers, has them blinded, which is the customary punishment for failed Roman pretenders in this era. And in the aftermath, he's able to recover this great chunk of territory in the west, as well as several islands. And this restores the old boundaries of the Empire of Nicaea, which had been founded by his predecessor Theodore I. So this was a really good start. And at the same time, the ruler of the Despotate of Epirus, which is basically southern Greece across the sea, another of these Roman successor states, Theodore Doukas. He's also doing very well and having some early success. And in the middle of the decade, 1224 to 1225, these two Roman rulers are in a position, if they had joined forces, to close in on Constantinople, take it, recapture the capital, only barely 20 years after it had been conquered by the Fourth Crusade, and restore the Roman Empire. They could have done it then, and if they had joined forces, they probably would have succeeded. But instead, they chose to go their own separate ways and pursue separate alliances because they didn't want to help each other, because each of them considered themselves to be the sole emperor, and they didn't want to get in some awkward power-sharing arrangement. The last thing either Vatatzes or Theodore wanted to do was to join forces to capture Constantinople, because then they would have to fight over it, and that would be very awkward. It would just be another civil war. So Theodore goes off to fight the Bulgarians and does very, very badly. He falls into an ambush and is defeated by the Bulgarian Tsar, John III. His army is completely shattered in this ambush. He's captured and he's blinded. So another blinding, this brutal punishment. And he's allowed to live, and he survives this brutal operation. But this has been obviously a terrible defeat for Theodore, and he really struggles to recover from this point onward. To be fair to him, he keeps fighting on and trying to restore his position and the position of his dynasty, even though he's been blinded. He's not for giving up. Whereas John Vatatzes, he turns aside to fight the Turks, the Seljuk Turks, who are threatening his eastern border in Anatolia along the Meander River. So this is up to about 1227, 1228, and he does very well. He manages to drive the Turks back. And he also pursues a very clever policy of relocating Cumans. Cumans are a nomadic tribe originally from a part of the Crimea, I think, parts of Russia, who had crossed the Danube and invaded the empire in previous decades. But John seeks to exploit their manpower by moving them onto his eastern border and using them as guards, as border guards, to defend against further attacks from the Turks, which is a very smart, effective policy, works very well. At the same time, he also engages in this very sort of complicated game of politics, in which he plays off the Turks against the Mongols, who are now coming into Anatolia and threatening to overrun everything. This is getting up to the mid-13th century, where the Mongols pose their greatest threat to both Anatolia and Christian Europe. But John plays them all off against each other very skillfully. He makes and breaks all these alliances. And his concern is to keep any invader, the Turks, the Mongols, whoever it might be, out of his territory. And he does that very well. This is a game he plays very well. But in order to do these things and to succeed as a medieval ruler in the 13th century, this very cruel, brutal environment where there's no room for failure or hesitation, Vatatzes has to be as pragmatic and ruthless as anyone else. And that's exactly what he was. This is not a very saintly figure. As I said, there's a big distinction to be made between the real John Vatatzes and this kind of perfect saint he was later worshipped as. He owed his success, this eventual brilliant success he achieves in the last sort of 12 years or so of his reign, to two very ruthless acts. Firstly, he invites Theodore Doukas, the blinded ruler of Epirus, whom I mentioned earlier. He invites him to a meeting, pretending that they were going to negotiate and forge an alliance. But as soon as poor old Theodore turns up, Vatatzes has him arrested and thrown into prison and held in custody, which is quite sort of treacherous, really. But it's very smart. It's very effective, because Theodore, even though he's blind, he's got a son, and his his own empire, or the despotate of Epirus, still poses a threat. And if he's going to restore the Roman Empire and make the Empire of Nicaea the most powerful state in the East, Vatatzes needs to neutralise Theodore and Epirus. And he does it without fighting in the end. He just does it via this sort of act of very pragmatic treachery. And it works out very well, because Theodore never poses a threat again. The second thing he does, equally ruthless, in 1246, is when the Bulgarian Tsar, John Isan, dies and leaves a young son, a child, Michael, to succeed him, Michael Asen. Now, previously, Vatatzes had forged an alliance with the Bulgarians, but when he hears that John Asen, who's this very formidable figure, has died and left a child to succeed him, Vatatzes doesn't hesitate, really. He breaks the alliance, immediately attacks Bulgarian territory, and within 3 months, he conquers this vast swathe of territory in the Balkans and shifts the borders of Nicaea westward, all the way up to Dyrrachium, which is an old Roman province on the western coast. And it's a stunning success, really, and Vatatzes is able to do this because he exploits this sort of relative power vacuum in Bulgaria, and he betrays this child, the Bulgarian child Tsar, Michael Asen. He just breaks his alliance and basically stabs this boy in the back. But it works, and this is the sort of pragmatic, ruthless action that gets results, especially in this very difficult, fragmented environment of the East in the 13th century after the fall of Constantinople. Only the sort of most ruthless is going to survive and prosper, and Vatatzes certainly does that. And he would have justified everything he does on the grounds that he needs to get results, he's up against great odds, he's threatened on all sides, and he's got to do whatever works, basically. He also forges a very important alliance with the Holy Roman Emperor, the German Emperor Frederick Hohenstaufen, and together they join their forces to defeat their enemies. Frederick Stupa Mundi, as they called him, the wonder of the world, was probably the most powerful and impressive European ruler of the time, so it made perfect sense for Vatatzes to make friends with him. They have a very close alliance. And Vatatzes also twice opened negotiations with the Pope in Rome, the papacy, proposing the union of the Roman and Orthodox Church. They've been divided for centuries. Now, this is a very controversial policy in the East, and would be for many years, because the Greek Orthodox Church regarded itself as entirely separate from Rome, and especially after the Crusaders had attacked Constantinople in 1204, they did not want to have anything to do with Rome, because it was basically Rome that had organised that crusade. But Vatatzes realises that union with Rome is the only realistic way of neutralising any potential further threat from the West. Because if the two churches are united, obviously Rome is not going to launch any further crusades against the East, because there's no excuse for it, there's no reason. And while this doesn't happen during his reign, it's never actually established, the union. Vatatzes was very willing to do it. And again, consider his status, his current status as a saint of the Greek Orthodox Church. Well, this wasn't very saintly behaviour. It was pure policy. And the emperor who would eventually recover Constantinople, Michael VIII, in 1261, a few years after the death of Vatatzes, he would pursue the same policy of union with Rome, which was hugely unpopular within the empire, and caused Michael all sorts of problems. But we shouldn't forget that it was John Vatatzes who was initially very keen on this idea. So by the end of his reign, the 1250s, Vatatzes has reconquered an astonishing amount of territory, really. He probably astonished even himself by how well he had done. He had twice attacked Constantinople in alliance with the Bulgarians, but on both occasions the attack failed. They were driven off by the Latin garrison. But even so, this was just delaying the inevitable, because the Nicene or Nicaean Empire was now by far the most powerful of all of the Roman successor states. It had reconquered enormous chunks of territory, and as I said, Constantinople was now stranded in the middle of this expanded Nicene Empire. And I mean, Vatatzes himself died in 1254, I think. Dies peacefully in the grounds of his palace. He's in his 60s. But it was only a matter of time. If he had lived a few more years, he probably would have been the man to enter Constantinople in triumph and be crowned emperor of a restored Roman Empire in Hagia Sophia, which would be no less than he deserved. But in the event, it's his cousin Michael VIII who achieves that only a few years down the line in 1261. So that, in a nutshell, was the career of John Doukas Vatatzes. A very important emperor, very successful, and as I said, I don't wish to offend anyone or make it sound like I'm being overly negative about this revered figure. But there is a genuine distinction to be made between the political reality of who this man actually was and how he was perceived by later generations. And he's obviously by no means alone in that. That was often the case with most of these medieval figures. Okay, I hope you enjoyed that. Get in any sort of comments below, like and subscribe if you wish to. And thank you. I'll see you next time.